I found a poem hidden in the archives, impossible words about feelings from a species that genetically banned emotions 1,000 years ago. And when I recognized the Queen's handwriting, I should have reported her as an anomaly to be corrected. But instead, I kept the poem and told her it was the most beautiful thing I had ever read. Dr. Ethan Cole let out a shaky breath, feeling his heart race as he leaned back against the cold metal wall of the Vel'Thane Royal Archive. His hands were trembling slightly as he held onto the datapad that contained the evidence of what should be impossible. A poem written by Queen Thessaly herself, expressing emotions that her people were genetically programmed to suppress. He had been researching the pre-suppression era of Vel'Thane history for months now, at the request of the Galactic Council, but never in his wildest dreams did he expect such a revelation. He pushed off from the wall and hurried towards the exit, careful not to make too much noise as he navigated through the rows upon rows of metal shelves packed with ancient data disks and scrolls. Once outside, Ethan paused briefly, glancing around cautiously before heading back to his quarters, where no one would question why a human was walking around late at night. Back in his room, under low light conditions provided by an emergency lamp, he carefully placed the datapad on his desk and stared down at it with wide eyes. The poem was tucked into the corner of the screen, a small icon indicating that there were more files attached. His curiosity piqued once again despite knowing full well what consequences might arise if anyone else discovered its existence. The next morning, he returned to work as normal without giving away any hints about his discovery until 2 days later when guards arrived at his quarters. "Dr. Cole," one of them said sternly, while the other held out a hand for him, indicating that it was time to leave immediately and follow their lead back into the palace. Ethan expected this. He knew Queen Thessaly would eventually discover her missing document, after he took the liberty of reading through its contents multiple times. With steady nerves masking his internal turmoil about what awaited on the other side, he stepped out into the hallway and allowed himself to be escorted directly to a set of double doors leading inside the royal chambers. Inside, there were no guards stationed within. Only Queen Thessaly herself stood waiting for him behind an ornate desk. She was as impeccable in appearance as ever, pale gray skin with silver hair tied back neatly into a bun, eyes that did not betray any emotion whatsoever, but held a certain intensity under their gaze when they met his. "Doctor?" "Yes?" Ethan replied nervously, yet resolutely standing straight up without allowing any sign that something was wrong in his demeanor towards someone who held immense power over not just Vel'Thane's society, but also their genetic code as a whole. "Cole," she said flatly upon entering the room, her voice devoid of inflection, save for an underlying strain he could detect only if one looked closely enough like himself. "You found my poem," she stated plainly, waiting for him to confirm or deny it outright. He nodded slowly in response before reaching into his pocket where the datapad was kept safe inside a small pouch, pulling out both simultaneously, so that it could now see exactly what evidence had caused him such distress during those nights he lay awake trying desperately to figure out how best proceed under these circumstances. He knew there would be no getting around this question, even though he wanted nothing more than to turn back time and erase his accidental discovery of her private writings from existence entirely. "I did." She held his gaze unwaveringly, while silence stretched long between them, as though she were attempting to discern the truth behind why this foreigner with no ties or loyalty towards Vel'Thane law had chosen not to inform anyone else about her illicit possession of emotional language forms. "Why? Because this isn't defective," Ethan answered honestly after a moment's hesitation, seeing no reason anymore why he couldn't speak freely now, given that any secrets carried here would be shared equally amongst both parties, concerned regardless of what might happen moving forward from this point. "What do you mean?" she asked sharply, taking another step closer to him as though trying not only to understand, but also test whether these words meant anything more than mere hollow assurances designed simply for diplomatic courtesy's sake. Alone. Yes, Ethan admitted finally after taking another deep breath. You did not report me, Queen Thessaly said next, voice still sounding eerily devoid, even if slightly less cold than before. But Ethan noticed immediately how her eyes flickered momentarily before shifting back into their usual detached facade, once again making something in his chest tighten, knowing she was indeed listening intently. But this... He tapped on one particularly poignant stanza referring directly toward how much it hurt inside herself every day, just trying to pretend otherwise against her own will, alone. I feel the sunrise like fire in my chest, joy that I must swallow whole love that burns where none should exist. This, he continued softly, looking up into those unreadable eyes now meeting with his steadily, despite the fact neither could quite tell what lay beneath them anymore. Is beautiful. She was very still then. Almost frozen, Queen Thessaly watched Ethan closely as he stood before her, holding out his datapad where one of her poems was displayed in full view. I study your species, he clarified gently, holding up the datapad where evidence of Queen Thessaly's emotional expression lay clearly visible for all to see. You were supposed to feel nothing, no joy, sorrow, love. The room was silent, except for their breathing and the occasional echo from distant hallways outside. Why did you do this? She asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan met her gaze squarely, feeling the weight of centuries of Vel'Thane history resting on both his shoulders and hers. Because I understand, he said simply. You're not broken. She took another step closer to him, as though drawn by an unseen force. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise or perhaps even hope. Explain yourself, she demanded softly, her voice still devoid of emotion, but holding a new layer of curiosity and maybe longing. I study your species because I'm curious about what you've done, about how you managed to live without feeling. But when I read this, it's not just science anymore. He paused, looking at the lines on the screen that spoke volumes more than any data could ever convey. Your words aren't defective, he continued firmly. They're powerful and true. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if struggling to comprehend what she was hearing. This human scientist, who had no reason to care, was defending her, someone who should not exist in the first place according to Vel'Thane laws. You risked much by coming here, Queen Thessaly stated bluntly, her voice a mixture of accusation and something else. It seemed as if she was trying to discern whether his words held any real meaning behind them, or were merely empty platitudes designed solely for diplomatic purposes alone. I know the risks, Ethan replied honestly, but you shouldn't have to be hidden away because of what you are. She regarded him silently, her mind racing with questions and a whirlwind of emotions she had never dared acknowledge openly before now. He didn't back down from that intense scrutiny. Instead, he stood taller and met each challenge head-on. After another moment's silence, Queen Thessaly nodded ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, and stepped closer still, until their bodies were mere inches apart. Then show me, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the palace. Show me that I am not alone. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him at those words, but also an acute sense of responsibility and fear for what lay ahead if they continued down this path together. He knew full well how dangerous it would be to continue, yet he couldn't help feeling compelled by her request. May I? Ethan asked softly, gesturing towards the datapad in his hand again where another poem she had written sat awaiting attention. I want you to see, really see, that these aren't mistakes. She hesitated for a moment longer, before finally nodding ever so slightly, giving him permission with her eyes and posture rather than words. He brought up one of the poems he thought was particularly moving, the one that spoke about longing and loneliness even when surrounded by people. It described how love could blossom despite all odds against it. With each line read aloud, Ethan's voice carried not just the words, but also an underlying sympathy and understanding for her struggle. I feel the sunrise like fire in my chest, joy that I must swallow whole love that burns where none should exist, he recited gently, watching as Thessaly listened intently despite the mask she wore. These aren't broken thoughts or sick ideas. They're real experiences from someone who feels intensely and survives. For a long moment, nothing happened except for her silence and his careful reading of each line with reverence. Finally, breaking eye contact to look down at the datapad again, Thessaly's fingers trembled ever so slightly as she reached out tentatively toward it. When their hands touched, the warmth from Ethan spreading across her cold skin, she gasped softly in surprise. "You do not think I am broken," she murmured almost reverently after a moment of this contact between them. "I think you are the most human alien I have ever met." He paused then, realizing just how awkward that statement sounded coming out in such a formal setting like this one between two beings who were supposed to be from entirely separate worlds. That came out wrong. But Thessaly seemed to understand nonetheless because she didn't react negatively, but rather leaned closer again until her breath brushed against his cheek when speaking next. "I understood what you meant." She sat beside him then on the edge of a nearby desk while he continued reading through several more poems about everything from lost dreams and unspoken truths to moments shared with someone who could feel alongside her. "Far from it," he answered honestly, his hand lingering on hers even as the rest of him tensed with awareness of how dangerous their proximity was becoming. "Sorry," he chuckled nervously, his cheeks flushing slightly despite himself. Each line brought out new expressions from Thessaly, strange looks of wonder mixed with fear, as she realized just how much of herself was being laid bare right before this human's eyes. "You are beautiful like this," Ethan told her truthfully after a while, his hand still holding hers tightly despite everything that could go wrong if someone else discovered their secret meetings. Letting the mask fall. "It's brave." She laughed then. An actual laugh. Something so rare and director, Vex closed in on Queen Thessaly's quarters, his presence as imposing and ominous as ever. She had been noticing subtle changes in him lately. Tightened lips, narrowed eyes. He was closing in. "You requested a routine genetic scan," Director Vex announced formally from the entrance of her private chambers. His tone hinted at urgency, but it could have also meant suspicion. Thessaly steeled herself for what she already knew would come next, an order she couldn't refuse without drawing attention and causing more harm than good. "Very well." She paused, knowing every word had to be chosen carefully. "Ethan will accompany me." Director Vex's eyes flickered towards Ethan, no doubt analyzing the human scientist who dared intrude into Vel'Thane affairs so deeply. He nodded curtly, before disappearing as swiftly and silently as he appeared. As soon as they were alone, Thessaly turned to face Ethan with a mixture of dread and determination etched on her features. "If the scan finds the anomaly," she began slowly, her voice breaking as if carrying too much weight for one person, "I will be taken for correction. Emotional centers removed. I will become what I have pretended to be." She looked away briefly, unable to meet his eyes, when saying it aloud seemed impossible. "I would rather die." The words left a bitter taste in her mouth. She never wanted them to come out so openly, but felt the need to warn him of the gravity they faced. Ethan's expression softened immediately. He had been researching since their last meeting, diving deep into genetic databases and Vel'Thane history. What he found made his heart ache for Thessaly even more than before. Before that, Vel'Thane felt like any other species. He brought out his datapad again and showed her pages upon pages filled with historical records, skeletal remains from ancient times showing evidence of neural pathways capable of experiencing joy, fear, love, all traits suppressed by genetic manipulation. The emotional suppression gene was added 1,000 years ago. Ethan began with a heavy sigh as if unloading the weight of an entire civilization's history. 70 years spent hiding a secret, so profound it threatened everything she believed about her people's origins and identity. Now someone was confirming that perhaps there had been life beyond emotional repression long ago in Vel'Thane. History.guide. She stared at the data before blinking slowly as if trying to process its implications fully. "You are not broken, Thessaly," Ethan said earnestly, while touching the tablet for emphasis on each page. "You are what your species used to be, what they chose to destroy." Thessaly's eyes met his then, and he saw recognition spark within her, understanding breaking through layers of self-doubt and societal programming that had held her captive so long. "We were not always like this?" she asked almost in disbelief, as if the words themselves still sounded foreign despite evidence proving otherwise. Ethan shook his head solemnly. "Your ancestors made a choice, one you never got to make." He took both of Thessaly's hands gently then, something he knew could easily get them into trouble, but felt necessary given how much she needed him at that moment. "You are not a disease," Ethan reassured her firmly, while looking directly into her eyes. "You are a miracle, a piece of history that survived against all odds." She processed this revelation further, allowing the warmth in his gaze and touch to seep through barriers years of isolation had built up around her heart. Then she did something unexpected. Thessaly kissed Ethan. It was swift yet powerful, illegal and dangerous, but also liberating after lifetimes spent repressing every shred of feeling deemed impermissible by Vel'Thane society. Her eyes widened in surprise upon realizing what she'd done, then softened, as if finally allowing herself to feel it too, not just the act itself but its implications for everything between them now. He kissed her back almost immediately, a response born not out of lust or mere affection but mutual understanding and respect, shared by two souls, bound together against impossible odds. And somewhere, deep within their bond, something shifted profoundly. A queen breaking laws, centuries old to seek freedom beyond repression. A human who saw potential in imperfection rather than punishment for nonconformity. Love blossoming amidst forbidden territory where nothing was supposed to grow except duty and cold detachment. Director Vex wouldn't stop searching. That much Thessaly knew with every fiber of her being. But right then, they didn't care about any impending consequences or societal norms dictating their actions. They had each other. They felt something tangible worth fighting for, despite the dangers ahead. Somewhere in that kiss lay seeds not just of affection but hope, a defiance against everything Vel'Thane laws stood for and promised to destroy if left unchecked. Love was banned here, true. But sometimes breaking rules could be the only way to build a future where such prohibitions no longer held power over hearts, ready to live rather than merely exist. The council chamber was a grandiose expanse of cool, sterile surfaces and imposing figures, illuminated by an array of harsh lights that left little room for warmth. Queen Thessaly Vel'Thane stood at one end, her silver hair cascading down to pool around her feet, like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, usually devoid of any emotion, now held a storm of turmoil she dared not show openly. "Council members," he began, turning towards Thessaly with a cold glare that spoke volumes without words, "we have gathered here today to address serious anomalies detected in our queen." The assembly stirred uneasily, whispers rippled through the crowd like distant thunder. Director Vex approached the center, his voice carrying across the vast space with an authoritative edge that silenced all murmurs. "I've found evidence of emotional indicators and signs of genetic defection. These are clear violations of Vel'Thane law," Vex continued, his voice dripping with accusation as he presented Thessaly's poem to the council members scattered around the chamber. Ethan Cole stood beside Thessaly, his presence more supportive than intrusive, an academic observer now thrust into a political storm beyond any scientific dilemma. He could see the tension in her shoulders and felt it mirrored within him. This wasn't just about research anymore, it was personal. "Queen," Vex demanded sternly, as he stepped closer to the podium before her, "submit yourself for examination, or admit your guilt." Thessaly's eyes flickered towards Ethan briefly, a silent plea that words could not convey. She took a deep breath and straightened her back, steeling herself against the impending trial. She looked at Vex then, her gaze unyielding yet vulnerable, and nodded reluctantly in agreement with his terms. "I will submit." As council members began their preparations for what would inevitably be an invasive scan, Thessaly's mask slipped into place, a cold facade that hid everything she had fought to keep hidden. She moved towards the center of the chamber where medical pods awaited, and her heart felt heavy, the weight of years of secrets and lies pulling at her soul. Vex observed with satisfaction. His moment was here, a chance to finally reveal what Thessaly had tried so hard to hide from both him and her people for 70 years. He stood before the council, presenting evidence that could define an entire species' future, or destroy it outright. "There," he declared triumphantly, as he held up images showcasing Thessaly's genetic anomalies clearly displayed on a holographic screen above them all. "She is not just defective. She represents what our ancestors were forced to leave behind." Thessaly's gaze turned towards Ethan again, and this time she met his eyes fully. They mirrored each other's strength and courage. The bond they shared now wasn't just between two individuals, but a defiance against everything that had suppressed them both for generations. Proof of their error. But before anyone could comment further, something shifted in the room, a ripple running through it like an unspoken truth, breaking free from years of repression. "Director Vex," Thessaly spoke then, her voice carrying an emotional weight none in this room could have imagined ever hearing from their queen before now. "I choose not to lie." Silence fell across the assembly, eyes wide and mouths agape at her statement. She lifted her chin slightly, as if drawing on every ounce of resolve within herself. She continued, each word a challenge against everything they believed. "I am what we used to be," she clarified firmly, while holding up Ethan's research papers with pride despite knowing how dangerous it was for him now too. How much of his life could unravel because he stood by her side? Her voice carried across the room like a clarion call, one that demanded attention and respect, but most importantly, dared them all to reconsider what they thought they knew about their own history. 1,000 years ago, she declared loudly enough for even those at the back rows to hear, our ancestors felt as I feel now. She stepped closer towards Vex, despite his attempt to interrupt her again. It was clear he hadn't expected this. "And I will not let you remove my heart, nor anyone else's in this room." Confusion and outrage mixed with a growing sense of awe among council members as they processed her words, suddenly faced with an alternative history that challenged everything they thought was true about themselves. But how? Vex tried to interrupt again, but she held up a hand, silencing him momentarily, while continuing her statement directly towards Ethan. "This human," she said softly yet clearly loud enough for everyone present, "showed me I am a heritage die." She took one step closer still, closing the gap between them. "I am proof that our hearts survived what we tried so hard to destroy," Thessaly announced defiantly, while looking directly into the eyes of those who had ruled over Vel'Thane for centuries. Thessaly grasped Ethan's hand openly then, something never done publicly before, and now it was a visible act of defiance against all Vel'Thane laws. "Director Vex," she addressed him again firmly while holding his gaze steadily in hers, You want to correct me? Remove my emotions? Her voice grew softer, yet still commanding. She shook her head slowly while looking directly at Ethan once more before addressing the council again. Or perhaps it is time for us to consider why we are so afraid of feeling anything.